But one of the biggest lessons I learned with respect to my team was learning when to just say no to some of those areas of opportunity or some of those research projects when we had to go super deep culturally and rely on the local experts to get that work done.
Hi, I'm Matt Egol, host of the CX and Culture Connection, the podcast for leaders looking to drive value by focusing on customer experience and culture together. I'm super excited to be here today with Mitch Doering. He's the global head of people technology at Wayfair, and we go back a bit. We worked together back in the day at Booz Strategy and PwC. So I'm trying to remember what the branding was exactly at the time before you went over to Amazon. And was it Strategy at that point?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So welcome. Thanks for coming on the podcast, Mitch.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
We're going to have a lot of fun. So I guess, prior to being at Mayfair, you've had roles at Amazon, PwC, and Target. Tell us a little bit more about your journey and what you're up to at Wayfair these days.
Yeah, so I like to treat my career as a bit like chapters in a book. It's a bit of the intersection between retail, e-commerce, technology, each in little spouts and bits. So started my career at Target in retail, spent some time in strategy consulting at the intersection of technology and customer experience, utilized that to springboard over to Amazon, where I've led a customer experience strategy team for several years. And now I've been leading an HR function or people function at Wayfair for the last 5 years. My current remit is focused on typical HR BP functions, plus people analytics and our tech learning and development teams. As of late, I've been leaning in to help us with our Gen AI enablement strategy, supporting our COE and enabling our technology population, as well as the wider Wayfair employee population in terms of enabling their AI capabilities, their education, and essentially just getting them up to speed and ready to roll with AI.
You've got your hands full there because there's a lot going on with AI and there's a lot of opportunity both in customer and employee experience to leverage AI. It's a fun topic that we often talk to about. I'm really excited to get your thoughts on this today. So, you mentioned the leading a COE. How much of your role there is building stuff directly versus like training and education and like helping upskill the people who then build it themselves?
Yeah, I would say at the start of this, we probably started our journey on our AI path maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. And through that period of time, we haven't actually had anything installed. It's basically build it yourself, to answer your question, Matt. Um, a lot of what we were trying to do is really take an experimentation approach where we offer AI tools to all of our teams. We look at usage and adoption metrics. And then once we choose the critical few tools, how can we actually enable our crew, our engineers, our tech leaders, our product managers to adopt them and to use them to the fullest effect, essentially. And so we've ended up building the entire strategy from scratch. My involvement has really been supplemental to that. Our technology leaders lead from the front typically, and HR acts as an enabler in the background, ensuring that we've got one, the right training content, two, the right measurement framework, and three, the right way to think about how we incentivize our people to adopt AI and to utilize AI in the workplace.
When you think about adoption of AI, AI could be adopted in homegrown solutions. AI could be adopted in SaaS solutions. AI can be adopted just people using tools like cloud and GPT in appropriate environments with safeguards. Like, is it all of the above? Like, how are you thinking about training and adoption for AI?
Yeah, I would say that the way that AI is progressing in the marketplace right now is that these third-party tools are moonshotting each other at such a rapid pace that it can become so difficult to build a homegrown tool methodology, algorithm of any kind to sort of keep up with it. And that's a part of why we initially set our sights on a sort of test and learn approach, enable many of these third-party tools like Claude, like Gemini, et cetera, and leverage the learnings that we get from who chooses what tool to solve what solution and apply that to our decision criteria, essentially. Given the pace of change, as I mentioned, It's just we've treated it as an input to the overall strategy itself. We've been able to narrow down a critical few tools that we use, but in speaking to and working with several leaders across the organization, it's important to acknowledge that those tools are going to change in terms of their trajectory, their efficacy, et cetera. So what we've been reinforcing with our employees and with our teams are really not being afraid to throw something away, try something new, try a new tool, check in with a tool that you tried before that perhaps didn't work, and utilize the same prompt, adjust it, learn, and shift as we go.
So you mentioned that the roadmap and a lot of the technology was baked a little bit before you jumped in your HR leadership role. Where have you focused in terms of like supporting that adoption and driving the right behavior and upskilling? Like what's your remit then to drive adoption and get people to use the tools? If especially given a lot of it's more citizen led and as well as adopting third party platforms, what's your role in driving adoption and usage and upskilling?
Yeah, definitely. So we saw an opportunity from a tech learning and development perspective to lean in and ensure that three things occur. One, that people understand how we utilize AI at Wayfair. What does that mean from a rules, a governance perspective, and just from a getting up to speed standpoint? We didn't actually have solutions in place in terms of learning and development programs. Second was, how are we actually activating those populations? How are we getting them to the forefront of the ideation process and actually forcing them to test these tools or incentivizing them to test these tools in either a gamified way or in a way that rewards them and their teams? And third is essentially, how can we go about utilizing what we learned from that strategy of enabling them to drive further adoption and then embed those behaviors into the organization? And so it's a three-part solution in terms of how I've leaned in, or my team rather. And I have to say, I'd be remiss not to say I have a super strong set of team members that have come up with these ideas, have taken them, and have run with them. And so I've really been a cheerleader in the background, ensuring that we keep the train on the tracks and they get all of that done. Essentially, from an enablement perspective, when we started at the beginning, as I mentioned, we didn't actually have any sort of a formal training program. Nobody really knew how we were thinking about generative AI at Wayfair. And so we started by creating that framework, rolling it out to all of our employees and making it essentially a mandatory training. You treat it as sort of like an orientation training to generative AI, how to use it, how to appropriately navigate it, what should we be putting in generative AI, what sort of stopgaps and guardrails do we have from a data protection perspective, really just to increase employee confidence. Second, then we took it and we launched what we called an AI hackathon. It was a company-wide led initiative. We call it citizen led, similar to you. And what we did is we had over 100 teams from across the entire organization, whether they're technical or non-technical, bring forward solutions and present them to a set of our most senior leaders, our chief financial officer, technology, operations, and CEO. And what they did is they utilized that to identify a critical few use cases that we thought were actually really cool and that were incredibly creative that we thought we could activate against. And as a part of that process, we were able to identify, I want to say like 60 plus use cases. There's probably more. I've got the data in the background, but I just don't have it top of mind right now. And they were incredible, like from solving talent acquisition use cases to building new customer focused solutions on the technology side. And as a part of that entire process, we were able to utilize that as a mechanism for orienting our teams to the AI tools that are available to them. Some teams had access to Gemini, others to ChatGPT. That's what really drove that adoption. We were able to actually increase our adoption rate of generative AI tools to nearly 70%. And that was an incredible feat in terms of that gamification strategy.
You
Now
say
we're at the embed stage.
70% of the target populations using it, or 70% of what?
70% of our entire corporate employee population, or 70% of the employees that have access to those tools.
It's really cool. Um, how did the behavior of the employees have to evolve, and how did you think about defining the behaviors, what behaviors you want more of, and then how you kind of use the right formal and informal change levers to get the behaviors?
Yeah. So we tested a whole smattering of approaches. Some failed, right? Sometimes we just don't know if it's the right solution. Sometimes we hit the nail on the head. We piloted and we launched a generative AI champions program. And I leveraged some of the learnings that the you that I learned from working at Strategy and where we'd nominate a critical few leaders to actually take
You're
that.
using Katzenbach language.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The critical few leaders that we learned from the Katzenbach Center to sort of drive that forward, set expectations, and then allow them to embed those behaviors and strategies within the organization. In pockets, it was wildly successful. We had some of our most junior, non technical folks on our teams developing low code, no code, and some code solutions that wowed the heck out of us because I myself couldn't have pulled that off, but an entry level analyst on my team was able to pull something together that was incredibly robust. It might have been like a new learning and development tool or an automation process workflow to help us identify individual technical reviewers to help us with our promotion process. Back to your question, though, in terms of incentivizing the behaviors, we're actively doing that now as a retrospective. And so we didn't really want to say, these are the specific things that you absolutely need to do. It was more of a broad mandate. Like you should be using generative AI because that's the future and we should all be testing and learning from it. Now that we're at a stage where we're pivoting to it being a baseline expectation for how we do our work, what we're doing is we're embedding that into our existing scope and skill expectations. So our people principles, as you would call that at Amazon or something similar here at Wayfair, as well as scope. So what we expect outcome wise for our teams. We're actually rolling that out in the technology organization over the course of the next month. And we're doing so in a specific and flexible way because we know that AI is always changing. And so it's more about focusing on the outcomes and not trying to get it perfect out the gate and letting sort of perfect be the enemy of good and just acknowledging that we're going to need to come back to it and visit it maybe sooner than we think, right?
As you're building out the knowledge of the people, like the skills, the behaviors, the mindsets, the relationship networks, all the stuff that goes into culture and how you build a learning organization. How are you thinking about um, the way that you build homegrown? We talked about the technology, about homegrown training and learning and certification versus relying on external things that are more ANSI or other formal training and certification programs?
That's a really interesting question. And I would say I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of a defined solution. I would say we're in like the early stages of brainstorming what that might look like. I'll tell you what I envision. I envision it being more of a self service model where managers can elect to create certain training or learning and development programs based on their existing team needs. Historically, running a learning and development function, the most common piece of feedback that I've gotten from teams were my team doesn't need to focus on this component of the training, or my team has a completely different remit, or we focus on a completely different platform. And I think the beauty of this generative AI tooling and the self-service model that it creates, assuming that we can create a set of parameters that work for these leaders, is that they can create it nuanced to the specific team member, right? Nuanced to the specific team, nuanced to the skill set of the individual. And you know that if you have a singular tool that you've been feeding code or information into as you onboard throughout the stages of the employee lifecycle, that generative AI tool is developing a perspective on you. And so you can begin to put prompts in that say, based on everything you know about me, what do you think the core skills are that I need to develop based on, each strategy document that I've written, each piece of code that I've actually written, all of that.
So, I mean, you referenced some of the PwC Katzenbach methodologies. Love to get your thoughts on as you're engaging people, what's the right mix of formal versus informal? Like for our audience, and you can fill in the blanks with any of the stuff you're emphasizing, but formal could be um, incentives, measurement, clarity of roles, org design, decision rights. Those are all formal change levers. Informal change levers are like mindsets, commitments, rituals. I should mention that formal training programs and role definitions on the formal side, but the informal is like establishing networks, getting people to make commitments, moving their mindsets, building rituals. These are all informal things, that often get overlooked and how important they are in driving the culture. So as an HR leader, how much are you driving these issues to shift the way work gets done? how much are you focusing on the formal versus the informal side to get these changes to occur?
It's a really interesting question. I would say what we're trying to ensure, just given that I support a technology population who sometimes can be rigid in their approach to looking at expectations and applying those in terms of how they get work done. We've really focused on the more formal aspect of that, ensuring there's clarity in terms of how teams are working, how we're scoping individual roles, and what that strategy looks like. The informal bit, it becomes more of a cultural nuance that occurs at the leadership level based on the conversations that we have. And so when you start to think about things like, how are my leaders setting a culture of innovation or a culture of experimentation on their team? You start to talk about what those tactics are in our leadership offsites, in those knowledge sharing moments. And so, how are you actually driving this with an X or Y team to my peer set across the organizational line? And so, it becomes more of a question strategy and maybe more of a conversation piece that we leverage often in many of our leadership offsites.
Now you're talking about leadership experience, and I'd love to get your take on this. One of the I wrote an article a number of years ago about return on experience cubed with Sujay Saha. Sujay was a guest on the podcast, so folks can check that out. And be sure to like and subscribe not to miss any episodes like that. So Sujay and I invented return on experience, and um, but we had this insight that customer and employee experience are key to create value, and companies are you can't create value without touching either CX or EX. It's not possible. Um, I challenge anyone to think of a way that creates value with because even cost reduction touches EX or CX. But there's leadership experience, which is the people don't often think about the fact that the way your leaders, and you were just talking about it, show up with each other, the way they collaborate, the way they mentor and coach others, the way you proactively and intentionally focus on the experience of your leaders, whether it's an offsite or their annual retreat or their planning exercise or the way they use their weekly meetings, that's actually important to get value out of investments in experience. So I've actually been focusing a lot of energy on this leadership experience topic in JourneySpark. I'd encourage folks to check out the episodes with Simon Robinson and with James Killian and go to www.lxaccelerator.net, which is something we're collaborating on. I'll share with you, Mitch. Like, we're basically creating a service offering. The three of us, we found each other. We all love leadership experience. James is a professor at Michigan State, and he has a book and podcast called The Customer Driven Leader. And so he teaches at Michigan with Luke Carbone, the CX program there. And then Simon's in Brazil, but he was one of the original people in the BT Labs, which is kind of like the Bell Labs of the UK. Very human factors focused. And he's written a book called Designing Customer Experiences with Soul. It's all about how leaders can. So all the three of us found each other. We all use leadership experience. And the whole point of the LX Accelerator is to intentionally engage your leaders in dialogue around what are the gaps you're solving, what's the future, how can they shape that future together, and then building a cultural movement where the leaders are driving the right system of change into the organization, where HR leaders partner with the business to help the leaders engage and build that cultural movements. Building on a lot of the stuff I learned building cultural movements with the Katzenbach Center, that's my contribution. What are your thoughts about this whole leadership experience space? Is that a good way to frame it? Do you pick it up differently?
No, I think it's a very interesting space, and we often think about it separate from the entire employee experience because, as you just mentioned, it can be treated as an enabler, right? Leaders often act as the foundation for setting culture on the broader teams that they lead. And so we often help our leaders grow in what I would say is a cost constrained environment. So I wouldn't say that we have a significant pool of resources to invest in leadership development at the higher levels. Normally, we expect our leaders to seek inputs from other areas, whether it be external, to start growing their skills or thinking strategically about how they're showing up within the workplace. The thing that we double down on the most is the interpersonal relationships associated with operating within a global business and context. you've likely seen this across various clients that you've served, but ensuring that there is a strong interpersonal relationship and investing time with those individual leaders to develop those relationships smooths the path to collaboration and helps those leaders grow in terms of role modeling the right behaviors, learning from each other, seeking input and confidence from those leaders, and then showcasing that with respect to their teams.
I mean, the relationship networks are so important at so many levels in the organization among the leaders with the managers with their teams. But the relationship networks are like the social influence networks within a company. And um, the formal networks that get established, like high performers and things like that, are actually just a portion of what the networks are normally forming. Um, and I personally like to think of culture as energy, Mitch. In fact, the name JourneySpark is actually about sparking energy in your organization, and that the organization is on a journey. So it's a play on words that there's customer journey, employee journey, leader journey, but the company's on a journey. And the journey spark, you'll often see me write like, I hope this sparks some great ideas and energy for you to act, because we want to spark energy. Culture either lifts up the energy or it drains it. And it's like a social network. The energy flows, and that's part of the job of the leaders, is to unblock the energy and get it to flow. And networks are key to that.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's really cool what you're working on. I'm going to take a quick break here for folks to check out our mastermind groups, which is another way to network. It's a way for leaders to network with each other. So there's one I do with Randy, one I do with Tamar, who both been on the podcast. Randy's a partner at JourneySpark. Tamar is someone we collaborate with. And the mastermind groups are a chance for you to network with other leaders and share and grow together rather than just listen to us. You can interact with each other. So let's listen to a quick sizzle reel, and then Mitch and I will come back on the other side in half a minute. Allow me to briefly interrupt the podcast to share an invitation for you to join one of our mastermind groups. These groups are for leaders building out the CX function at their organization. They are for culture champions looking to develop and sustain behaviors that bring their organization's mission, vision, purpose, and values to life. I'm excited to team with Randy Rothenberg, former CEO of the IAB, on a mastermind group focused on experience as a winning marketing strategy. I'm teaming with Tamar Cohen, who has led CX and EX teams at Zoetis and Travelers, on another group focused on CX EX alignment. Each group meets monthly for 90 minutes. Members receive a coaching hour each month and can attend quarterly workshops. Go to JourneySpark's website for more information. Please DM me on LinkedIn with any questions. Now, let's get back to the podcast. So, Mitch, it's been a lot of fun. We're talking about upskilling and adoption of AI and how work gets changed. One thing I want to bring back, when we were talking a lot about training, how do you think about, everyone says don't just train and automate the current work, you need to change the work. How do you think about, as an HR leader here, particularly with such a decentralized citizen-led approach, how to foster and ensure that people are rethinking and changing the work, not just automating and training what they do today?
Yeah. I mean, the way we've started to talk about this and in part implement, it's more of a preparation approach than execution approach, because I think we're like one step before the automation of workflows. We're sort of enabling our teams to do that with tools like NAN. And so the first thing that we typically do with our teams is just encourage them. Like, very basic is, if you're trying to redesign a process, you find yourself at a roadblock, you're looking to fix something, look at the entire process end to end, and then design backwards from the customer or the employee. How are we doing this in the most effective way possible? If that means throwing out the entire process, let's do it, right? Because if we have the capability to do that, reduce the number of touch points, tickets, process steps, then let's find a way to do that. And then when we get to the point of workflow automation or sort of AI agentic workflows and building that into our everyday, we've got a process flow that's not only optimized, but it's ready for workflow automation. There are fewer steps. There are fewer places for it to error out if we're depending on like a low or no code tool to actually drive those steps in the process itself. And so I would say that's probably where we've begun. Beyond that, it's more just about reminding and encouraging employees when those moments occur. Sometimes folks are trying to move at such a rapid pace that it becomes a second thought. And so, as culture leaders and as talent leaders within the organization, our role is to really remind people when that opportunity presents itself.
And you mentioned earlier that a lot of the focus was on Gen AI, which is, obviously a huge advance in AI. Could you talk a little bit about, within the organization, are you applying that mainly in marketing, sales, service, operations? Like which areas of the company do you see the greatest uptick in or focus around how to apply AI to change work?
Yeah, I would say our leadership team wants to see it everywhere. So that's the core mandate. My general exposure is really to the technology organization, and I would argue that we are leaps and bounds ahead of other parts of the org at this point in time. Our generative AI tools and our approach has become fairly advanced in terms of our leaders being familiar with the tools, executing against the core remits. I actually have a leader on one of my teams that created a new tool that acts as a junior software developer that we're using to pilot in greenfield code deployment. And he just built it on a random Saturday morning using Claude AI.
There's a lot you can do with vibe coding now.
It's very interesting. And I find that I always leave those conversations with a great deal of inspiration and a great deal of energy, to your point. Because learning from those leaders who have those robust technical backgrounds and have done this for decades can become an incredible conduit to help us learn from them, take that and drive those learnings within our own teams, such as my own.
hmm Well, I mean, you mentioned a few times now, like, citizen-led innovation, low code, no code. Now AI is I agree with you, is the next manifestation of an approach where people can start to develop new epics and user stories, to use agile speak, and work on them and develop them with far less central support, far less external support. It's obviously has a big impact on the way you resource and develop engineering teams and things like that. But this is now making its way over to other areas. Like as an example, marketing and sales and service. Um, I'm doing work as an example. This is public knowledge. Randy and I are working with agenticadvertising.org, which is a new association I was telling you about that we've helped advise during the launch and stand up of this new organization. It's agenticadvertising.org for people who want to check it out. Um, and AAO, as it's known for short, is emerged from like a 1,000-person open source development community with GitHub and Slack that got launched to create the advertising context protocol, AdCP, which is built on model context protocol and agent to agent. So this is all about bots talking to bots, right? So think about like a buyer bot with a seller bot, a shopper bot with another bot, a signals bot with a buyer bot, a creative bot with a buyer bot. And this is not just advertising, but actually it connects with commerce and loyalty and customer experience because the data signals to optimize the advertising need to be leveraging what happens elsewhere in the experience. And the content, you think of it as journey orchestration, needs to be in sync across them. These have historically been managed in silos. And also, the creative has been completely separated from the targeting and the optimization. Now, with AI and experimentation, you can actually do these things more in tandem. And what we're seeing is the shift in the roles, what's often called like a positionless marketer, someone who can do more roles. And what's fascinating is we have a phrase we're using at AAO that everyone is now a builder. In fact, Jim Lazinski, he was on the podcast as well. He's a professor at Northwestern. I met him when he ran the customer solutions team at Google, and I was on the shopper council there. Um, we used to run pilots and experiments with clients together with Google data and solutions. It was a lot of fun, like a big lab that we got to work on and share. Um, and a lot of the ideas for the mastermind group came out of doing that type of experience. So Jim is I got this idea. You're moving from authorship to coachmanship, from authorship to orchestration. That the skill set of marketers has changed. We went through a previous cycle where Pritchard at P&G said we need people to move from writing project management briefs to being brand entrepreneurs. They have their hands on keyboard. They learn to do things. They learn to use the tools, learn to think like a startup brand. Now what's happening is the marketer needs to think like an engineer in a software organization. They need to start thinking about being a builder, which actually one of the big things we're focusing on with AAO is not just the standards and protocols, but actually the education and professional certification we were talking about before. So our inspiration for AAO is actually more IEEE than other associations that are more lobbying and commercial interests. We actually want this to be about moving the industry because the whole value chain is going to be impacted by this, not just the commodities trading of programmatic advertising. This is going to change all of the work. And it's a huge shift that people are going through in marketing, sales, service, technology to reimagine work and drive the training and the upskilling. And we think that a lot of it will happen in the companies, but a number of the larger members are actually very interested in collaborating and developing the body of knowledge and the certification, more of an ANSI approach, because that doesn't exist for marketing. It only exists in law and medicine and technology and other sectors. And we envision this being done in marketing too.
Definitely. And I think some of the things that are top of mind too, as organizations navigate this space, or how you're optimizing your tech stack to enable it, right? Some organizations have grown so quickly over the course of the last several years that their tech stacks have become momentous in some capacities. And that can create risk in terms of their efficacy to move quickly to adopt some of these things from a marketing standpoint. I think that's a really valid point.
If anyone on the audience wants to learn more about AAO, they can go to agenticadvertising.org. You can join as an individual or as a company. DM me if you want to learn more. Happy to chat. Mitch, I would be remiss given your experience at Amazon. I'm sure the audience would say, why did you not ask him any questions about that? You led a team, as you mentioned, that worked on strategy and competitive benchmarking. So, what are some of the things that lessons learned that, I'm not asking you to divulge your work of any projects you worked on, but any of the lessons learned that from your time at Amazon that you're now applying at Wayfair that others maybe could benefit from in their own experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, we spent a lot of time listening to our customers, and it's no surprise. It's a huge investment area for Amazon. And at times we were ingesting survey data from tens of thousands of individuals, whether it be sellers or customers, to help identify even just the most minute change in our seller services portal or on our website to ensure that we were increasing essentially customer loyalty or customer satisfaction. And the biggest learning I had throughout all of that was not just to be investing in listening to your customers, because a lot of companies fail to do that, and creating those moments of empathy, right? Whether it be a weekly customer interview with your customer service teams, or sitting down with your UX designers and helping them understand the journey, or listening to an interview that a specific UX designer might be conducting across various levels of the organization. I think we've started to do that quite well at Amazon at Wayfair, where we have a customer interview every Friday. And we use that to embed that into our culture, back to your prior point. That's something that I think I learned at Amazon that has really carried through, and I recognize at other companies. The second is more nuanced, and I would say more blunt. It's just knowing when to stop a certain approach or shut off a certain data stream. Amazon is a global company in nature, and it's far more difficult to get customer information in completely different geographies. And so our teams commonly struggle to pull that together. It's okay to fail fast and say that didn't work and move on. But one of the biggest lessons I learned with respect to my team was learning when to just say no to some of those areas of opportunity or some of those research projects when we had to go super deep culturally, and rely on the local experts to get that work done. And so that sort of leads back to leading in a matrixed organization and knowing where those subject matter experts exist, sort of laddering back to the leadership experience that you mentioned earlier, Matt, the power of those networks and those expertise, and allowing ourselves to leverage them in more efficient ways to get work done. they sort of tie together to that virtuous cycle that you mentioned.
One of my earlier podcasts was with Oded Netzer and Paul Magnone. They wrote a book. Actually, Oded does work with Amazon, right? So he's the head of the data organization at Columbia, like the Data Institute at Columbia, and Amazon's like an Amazon fellow, does ongoing work with Amazon. I don't know if you guys ever cross paths. Oded Netzer. Um, so but what they have a book called Decisions Over Decimals, and one of the core concepts of the book is you don't always need to use the most rigorous analytics for every decision. Sometimes intuition and business networks is sufficient. And they have like a persona they like to make fun of, and I hope this won't offend people. Don't be see more, which is see more, like that you always need to see more data, right? And that sometimes you can decide how to make a decision, and the way to make a decision doesn't always require more data, particularly like at Amazon, they say if it's a reversible decision with a low stakes and people have good intuition, go test it. Like, and so like a principle I have, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is often people confuse, there are three paths you can go down to build insights, and they don't think deliberately about which of the three is the right path beyond just intuition. One is research, another is customer listening, and a third is experimentation in the market. They're complements. They're not the same thing. You can use research with like qual and quant and synthetic research with AI and other things now, but those are deliberate learning agenda where you want to learn stuff. Customer listening, increasingly, as you have better and better customer listening with AI, especially, you actually can spend less on research and testing because you have the insights regularly from what you're doing with Qualtrics or Medallia or Quantum or other tools. That we've actually seen clients that cut their research and testing budget by like $30 million. Say they were spending $100 million on research and testing. That's a big company. Or they might be spending 30 million and they cut six, but the point is 20, 30% because of this modern approach to listening. There's such high velocity insights, not just surveys, that they're able to spend less on bespoke research for user testing and things like that. A lot of it's digital user testing on mobile and websites and ad campaigns. And then the third bucket is experimentation, which like obviously Amazon and Wayfair do a ton of, where go test it, go figure it out. And like often the experiment is the best way to test it, not research or customer listening, because you just constantly can try things. Are those the right buckets? Would you frame it differently?
I think those are the right buckets. The way that I would think about it is, what are the types of problems that you're solving, and how are you creating the sustainable data sources to act as a weather vane or a compass in helping you guide those decisions? If you have a constant stream of data or a longitudinal survey that is sent wave over wave and you're given regressed variables to sort of dive deep on, that will only go so far. And so you often have to stop, pause, and think, okay, I'm looking at this from a 2x2 perspective. How much time do we have, and what's the relative impact of the decision that we're about to make? Can we just go talk to a customer or two or 10 and figure out the trend line in a very short amount of time?
Like a startup. A startup goes out and they build the MVP based on talking to customers.
Exactly. And then how can we take that back to the customers and gather input over time? So back to my prior point of not letting perfect be the enemy of good, and not falling down in the front of data or based on an extended need for data. To your point, that Seymour reference makes me laugh. But I think it's highly relevant, right? You need to be thoughtful about where you're investing your time. And sometimes the time constraints that you're up against will force you to do so anyways. And so you're like, well, I've got a week to get this done, so I'm not about to go and survey 30,000 people. That's impossible. Let's go talk to 3 and figure out what the next best thing is to do.
I mean, you've had enormous career growth. I really enjoyed working together and learned a lot from our collaborations at PwC Strategy. And it's great to see the impact that you're having. What are any coaching or advice you have for people about what you've learned about managing your career path that you would leave with the audience to learn from your experience?
Mine is find the people that are your advocates and hold on to them tightly. Those are the people that you learn the most from, because they're the people that believe in you and invest in you. And I feel like in a lot of the chapters of my career, when I think back to the moments that mattered most to me, it was those times when I might have doubted myself or my capability. And I've had folks, such as yourself, even obviously as one of my senior partners overseeing my work, leaning in to sort of guide and help me see the path forward. That's probably the biggest takeaway from me in terms of finding that level of mentorship and seeking it out early in your career so that you can use that as a springboard to grow. Second is just not saying no to anything. You can tell based on my current career path and my resume that like I used to work in merchandising and then I went to strategy consulting and there was a little bit of time in a startup environment. Now I'm in HR. None of that would have occurred if I wasn't open to new opportunities or willing to talk to someone new with a level of curiosity in that space. And that's enabled me to learn incredibly faster than I ever thought I could. And that's the second piece of advice that I would leave with folks.
That's awesome. Mitch, you sparked a lot of great ideas for me. I know you have for the audience too. If folks wanted to get in touch, is LinkedIn the best way?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks again for coming on the show.
Of course. Thank you for having me.